The purpose of philosophy, the purpose of virtue, the Stoics would say, is so that whatever situations life thrusts upon us, whatever we find ourselves doing or having to do, we should be able to say to ourselves, yes, this is what I trained for. You don't just magically have courage in the moment. It's something you train for. It's something you prepare. It's a philosophy that you build your life around. A young graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, this is Jimmy Carter. His dream is to be in the nuclear submarine service. And at that time, onto a nuclear submarine, you had to be interviewed by the great Admiral Hyman Rickover. Rickover personally interviewed every person that worked on a U.S. nuclear submarine. And he has this long, wide-ranging, very difficult interview with Jimmy Carter. And he asked Carter ultimately, at the end, he says, okay, but how did you stand in your class at the Naval Academy? And Carter puffs up his chest and he says, I was in the top 50 out of 500. He's proud of his rank. He starts to talk about his GPA. And he thinks this is what Rickover wants to hear. And Rickover lets him finish. And then he looks at him and he says, but did you always do your best? And Carter's first inclination, as I think many of ours, if we're asked, did you do your best, is to say, yes, of course, this is the best I'm capable of doing. I did my best. But he catches himself and he thinks about it honestly and he goes, maybe I didn't. He thinks of the times that maybe he didn't ask a question when he had one, or there was extra work he could have done and he didn't do it, when he didn't push himself physically in training or in exercises. And so he decides to give a truthful answer. He says, no, I didn't always do my best. And this is when Rickover asks a question that would change his life. He says, why not? And then he signals that the interview is over and he gets up and he leaves the room. And this question haunts Jimmy Carter for the rest of his life. He says, I've never been able to answer that question. Why hadn't I always done my best? Look, he couldn't go back and do better and work harder, but he could define the rest of his life and the rest of the situations he found himself in with this discipline, this idea of giving our best. And I think courage and discipline are related here because so often what holds us back from doing our best, from really putting ourselves into something, is our fear of that not working, right? We're like teenagers. We know if we don't try, if we don't give everything, then we have an excuse if it doesn't work. We can say, I didn't really want it. I don't care that much.